Evening and welcome to Charter Township of Van Buren Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, June 26th of 2019. We'll start with a roll call, please.
Franzoy. Here. Jeff Jar is excused. Donald Boynton.
Here.
Brian Kelly. Here. Medina Atchison.
Here.
Sherry Budd is excused. Carol Thompson.
Thank you very much. We have an agenda before us. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll take Commissioner Boynton with support Commissioner Kelly. Any additions or changes to the agenda? All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the agenda is approved. We have minutes from the meeting of June 12th of 2019. Is there a motion to approve the June 12th minutes? Commissioner Kelly, support.
Support.
Commissioner Boynton, any corrections or changes? None. All in favor of approving the June 12th, 2019 minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. First item on tonight's agenda under new business is a temporary land use approval. The applicant, Atchison Ford, is requesting a renewal of their temporary land use permit to park, lease, turn-in vehicles, and new vehicle inventory. The property is located at 8705 Belleville Road, Van Buren Township, which is on the east side of Belleville Road and north of Tyler Road. And before we hear from the applicant, we have a request from Commissioner Atchison.
Through the chair, I asked to be excused. I am related to the applicant, Craig Atchison.
Okay, so we need just a motion to do that.
So moved.
Support?
Support.
And all in favor? Aye. So thank you. We'll let you step aside, and then you'll come back for the next agenda item. So now we'll have a presentation by the applicant, please. Mr. Atchison.
Okay, thanks for seeing me tonight. I appreciate it. Really, I'm coming before you because I want to continue doing what I did last year just by putting my lease returns there and some new inventory when needed. Kind of give you, really nothing has changed other since then. Some things have changed, though. I do own the property now as of March. I did purchase the property, so I am the owner. Some of you may or may not notice I did tear down the building that was there in April. I do plan on doing some more improvements to the property. It's kind of just getting everyone in line to do it. It's been a tough spring for landscapers and contractors and people of such to do that. So I do have someone under contract to actually clean up the whole property, like kind of level it, so there aren't anything growing. It's just a matter of me getting them out there. It'll be done within the next month or so, I'm hoping. Then my next plan is to go around and secure the property with fencing. It's old. Some trees are growing through it and things like that. In the back of the property, there's some poison ivy I need to get rid of, and the fencing is really bad there. So I plan on getting that repaired this summer also to make sure it's secure. Possibly doing some lighting. I know I need to go and do that. I've got a bid to kind of maybe get some security lights there, but that's not a for sure thing yet. I'm looking at changing the sign. Now, this isn't a sure thing either. I know I have to go through, this is my little rendering, and I had to get permission to do this, but I'm looking to, promote the township also. Like, this is just my rendering. I haven't shown anyone. You're the first ones, so. So this isn't, I know I have to go through a process again and get permission to use Van Buren's name on it. But I thought, it is really a, kind of people coming into Van Buren, it might look good to say, hey, here's Van Buren Township, and, we've been here since 1961, so. That's something I want to try to do. I want to try to do for the township, myself both, but promote both of us. So, but that's really kind of business as usual. I appreciate you seeing me and any questions.
Happy to do it. So business is good.
Moving along.
All right, good. We'd like to hear that. We have a review letter from staff. Director Akers, you want to walk us through the high points, please?
So Atchison Ford is requesting renewal of their temporary land use permit for temporary parking and storage of vehicles at 8705 Belleville. Temporary use proposed for a 1-year time frame. Per the zoning ordinances, temporary uses that operate more than 7 consecutive days require planning commission approval. The temporary land use has been conducted for the last year with no issues that have been brought to the attention of the township. The applicant has made improvements to the property, as he had indicated. The vacant building that was on the site got taken down, and they've made efforts to make sure that the property is being well maintained. Based on this, there were several review criteria that we have in our zoning ordinance. My comments are listed in the staff report, but they're very similar to the report that we provided last year. Staff is recommending approval of the renewal of the temporary land use permit to continue the temporary land use. The recommendation is based on this review letter. And I listed several conditions that were the same that were listed on the prior approval. I'll just go through them quickly. There are some setbacks from the adjacent property lines, which the applicant has complied with. The vehicles parked immediately adjacent to Belleville Road have to be parked with the front of the vehicle facing away. The site is maintained in a clean manner. The hours of operation mirror the hours of operation for the Atchison Ford dealership. And then any exterior lighting or signs have to be reviewed internally by staff, and that the temporary land use permit is valid for a period of 1 year. And in this instance, if the Planning Commission approves it, it'll be valid until June 26, 2020. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Questions or comments from the commission? Anyone? Anyone in the audience? Questions or comments for this application? Any problem, Mr. Atchison, with any of the requirements spelled out in the letter?
I'm happy to
Excellent.
do it.
All right. We also have a review from last year from Fire Marshal with everything looking good and no changes there. So if there's nothing else, is there a motion? Kelly?
I move to approve the temporary land use request for Atchison Ford to continue the temporary land use of parking vehicles at the property located at 8705 Belleville Road, based on the analysis and subject to the conditions detailed in the staff letter dated June 21st, 2019.
Support.
From Commissioner Boynton. Excellent. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck with all of your improvements. It looks like we might be drying out a little. Tonight's agenda, Infinity Homes Township Park Site Plan Amendment. The applicant, Infinity Homes, is requesting an amendment to the approved Townsend Park Site Plan for revised single-family architectural elevations. The unfinished Townsend Park subdivision is the subject of the request. It is located on the east side of Morton Taylor Road and north of Ecorse Road. And we'll start with a presentation by the applicant. Good evening.
Reno Suave with Infinity Homes and Company, 42400 Grand River Suite 112 Novi. We currently worked out a deal with the developer, S.R. Jacobson, to purchase the remaining, I think, available sites in the front phase of Townsend, and looking to do similar to what we've done. If you're familiar, we were here before the board a couple years ago for Country Walk, and we've been doing really well there. I think we're
Good.
probably at close to almost 30 sales there in 2 years. So it's been a good sell so far. It's been a good mix. It's been enjoyable for our staff working with the township, and building apartments been great. Economic apartments been great, and we're looking to move forward and hopefully build out Townsend. So currently we have a lot of the similar plans you've already approved for Country Walk that we're looking to do in Townsend.
Okay.
Elevations are going to be very similar. Brick requirements are all pretty much all the same. We're meeting, I think the certain sites have to be side entry garages, so we're meeting that as well. That's pretty much it. We're looking to start right away with a couple, we only have about, I think, 24, 25 sites in there, I think. Looking to start right away with a couple quick inventory spec houses. So, and happy to answer any questions here for the board.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Suave. We'll hear the staff recommendation and see if there are any questions.
Sure, thanks.
So we'll go to you, Director Akers.
Thank you. The applicant, Infinity Homes, is requesting architectural approval for some additional home plans and facade elevations for residential dwellings in the Townsend Park development. As we've seen these before, there's an existing PRD agreement in place for the property, and there's also a consent judgment for the development, which was entered in 2014. I have reviewed the architectural plans based on the zoning ordinance and the PRD agreement, and I offer just a couple comments. Just a handful of comments I wanted to highlight. With regards to site plan, the submitted plans depict home widths of 40 feet and slightly larger than 40 feet, and the depths of the homes range from 57 feet to 42 feet. Based on this, the sizes, the house plans will fit on most of the lots in the subdivision. There may be some conflicts with some of the larger homes on some of the smaller lots, but staff is recommending that those be verified during permit review. As you know, we've specified before, staff does look at all the home plans that come in because we got to make sure they meet our substantially different requirement, but we also make sure that the setbacks meet and that the height requirements are met and that they are approved facades that the Planning Commission has already looked at. The other item that we looked at was floor area. The initial review, which we had saw at the last meeting, highlighted a couple elevations which did not meet the requirement. So the PRD requirement requires 1,700 square foot minimum floor area. The first submittal included 3 elevations which did not meet them. It was the Catalina, the Greenwich, and the Traverse elevation. The applicant actually modified the Greenwich and the Traverse elevation to provide a floor area which exceeds 1,700 square feet. And based on this, those two plans can be used. Regarding the Catalina, the applicant actually removed the elevation from the application. So as it stands right now, with this standard, the applicant is fully compliant. With facade elevations, the applicant has provided 9 different home models with at least 3 different elevation variations in each model. So in total, there are approximately 30 unique elevations which are proposed. Based on that, staff feels that the applicant has submitted enough elevations to ensure that we're meeting our substantially different requirements. So as the Planning Commission knows, minimum is 8. We've got to be able to provide different elevations across the street, and then 2 houses on either side and 1 house on either side across the street. So with the 30, I think they wouldn't have an issue meeting that requirement. The last item that we took a look at was with regards to side entry garages. We do have a standard where the applicant has to have a minimum 30% of all structures within a sub or site counter development to have a garage door oriented to an area other than the front lot. I included in the packet a plan that Alan Edwin had originally submitted in 2014 to show which lots were going to have side entry and which weren't. Based on this, Infinity Homes is providing several lots which are going to require to have, or purchasing, I'm sorry, several lots which are going to require to have a side entry garage. And because several of the elevations they provided have side entry garage options, the applicant is able to meet this requirement. The last comment that we had made in our review is with regards to approval from the homeowners association. The applicant's going to have to work with the homeowners association, which I believe is it still under control of Jacobson?
From what they represented, yeah, that's what they indicated to us. Those were my first questions of them.
Okay, so they'll have to get architectural approval from Jacobson, but
We need a letter of that, Ron, with our submittals in advance.
what we've done on Townsend Park is if the planning commission makes the motion to approve it tonight, it's just contingent upon approval. So you guys just get a letter from Jacobson and provide it to me, and we'll be good to go.
Okay, great.
So the recommendation based on the above comments is approval to allow Infinity Homes to construct the homes consistent with the provided plans. With a couple conditions, these are the similar ones we see with every one of these applications, that planning staff will review each application to determine compliance with the zoning, and that the other recommendation is that the applicant make efforts to obtain architectural approval from the HOA. So with that, be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks so much. Questions or comments from the commission? Anyone? Commissioner Boynton.
Just a couple questions for staff. Regards to you mentioning the other projects you've had here in the township. Just want to do a couple of housekeeping things. How have we been in relations as far as ordinance compliance, as far as maintaining the lots, grass and weed ordinances, and compliance with soil erosion concerns with the county and whatnot?
Well, with regards to grass and lawn cutting, I'm not aware of any issues over the last couple of years of grass and lawn cutting. I think the builders have kept up on that relatively well in most of the subdivisions. I know that in Cobblestone Ridge, they've had some challenges with it, but I think we've resolved most of them. We have been receiving a lot of soil erosion complaints in both Townsend Park and Country Walk. Staff does make an effort to go through those areas usually once a week to identify any potential issues and see if there's any areas which are really bad. We do try to talk to the builders to ask them to make sure that they're sweeping and that they're cleaning up the streets. And then if push comes to shove, we have called Wayne County and had soil erosion inspectors go out there to be the enforcement arm to make sure that the proper silt fence is installed, to make sure that the streets are getting cleaned up, that the bags that they put in the catch basins for soil are getting taken care of as well. We've had some challenges going back and forth, but I think at least now we're trending in a positive direction.
Okay, all right. For the applicant, in regards to any of the projects that you have currently going on in and around the township, as far as with the architectural approvals from any HOAs that are in existence, or I heard you mention S.R. Jacobson is pretty much, I know Townsend Park is a little different than from some of the other locations that we have, as far as with their history and whatnot, as far as you know, things reverting back to the county and whatnot. Don't want to get too technical with that, but for in any of the other projects that you've had, not necessarily in relation to architectural approvals, but have you established or reached out and made some type of establishment with the HOAs that are in existence, the projects that are already in existence, you know, been around for quite a few years, just making sure that there's a nice, amenable correlation that you're working with there, because with streets and roads and, you know, trying not to block the streets too much and things of that nature.
Yeah, understandable. To address the one thing in Country Walk, we were getting a lot of complaints about the soil erosion, but the only unfortunate thing in there is, I'm not trying to pass the buck to the purpose of this meeting, but there's, I think, 4 or 5 other builders, inclusive of us. So it's kind of, and you know, I'm on top of our staff as best as we can to maintain soil erosion control measures. But when there's other builders in there, I can't see how they run, you know, dictate how they run their company. And if someone's dumping dirt on our lots, or they're leaving a pile of dirt, or they have, you know, maybe gravel or something delivered, they got it, maybe is like half on the curb and half off the curb or something, that's just something that we just have to address as it comes. And I think, I'm sure as Ron can maybe tell you, I'm pretty responsive when I see complaints come in, and I'm on our staff about that. So I just do the best that we can with that. And like I said, I'm really responsive to that. And as far as communicating with the homeowners association, we haven't reached out to the HOA in Townsend yet. As far as just introducing ourselves, I'm not sure. We pretty much do Jacobson, I think, is what we pretty much just been working with. I'm happy to do so if you like. If you want to give me a contact information, I'm not sure there's another third-party management company that runs that.
That would be wise. You know, I would say that because you may have an occasion where you will not have that layer there between you and the homeowners that are already out there. In other words, there is no developer. It's just you. You're a lot owner just like the other lot owners that are out there, and you would be subject to whatever bylaws or CCRs that are in existence there outside of what is already established to place you outside of that bubble, if you follow what I'm saying.
To a certain degree, yes.
There you go.
I'm not sure this is one of those cases, but yes. But,
Well, I'm just speaking in general.
yeah.
Mhm.
We work with, we have about, I think going on, we have 14 active communities in southeastern Michigan, probably within the next probably 60 days. So either we're self-controlled, we're self-managed, or we're working with, you know, I think probably half of those where we work with current associations. So it's, you know, I'd be lying to you if I tell you there's not always disagreements between the two, and there's, you know, sometimes not everybody's perfect, and you know, we have several hundred contractors that work for us, and they have several hundred employees that work for them. So, you know, people make mistakes, and when they do, we try to just kind of clean up the mess and go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions or comments from the commission, the audience? If there's none, are you ready to take action on this recommended application? Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Kelly.
I move to approve an amendment to the site plan for the Townsend Park development in order to allow Infinity Homes to construct homes consistent with provided plans, which depict elevations to be constructed on the remaining lots in the subdivision. This is based on the analysis and subject to the conditions detailed in the staff letter dated June 21st, 2019.
Great. Support? Support. Commissioner Franzoy. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thanks, Mr. Suave. And if you just get that letter into the office here, once you have reached out to Jacobson and/or any homeowner association that exists at Townsend, then you'll be all set.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Super. Thank you
Thanks
very
again.
much.
Looking forward to it.
tonight's agenda. We are moving to general discussion. We have a couple of general discussion items. Start with item 1, which is senior housing zoning amendment. And we have some recommendations and considerations from McKenna and Associates. So, Ms. Krishnan, you want to walk us through it?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. A few meetings ago, we discussed before the Planning Commission the need to have senior housing opportunities and the ability to have such developments within the community. We got guidance at the meeting that you would like to have senior housing in the community and preferably as a special land use so that there is some amount of control in how these are developed. Now, our zoning ordinance, Article 2, which is the definition section, already includes multiple definitions for elderly housing. So instead of creating a new term called senior housing, we thought we would keep elderly because the term would also fit. And so we are calling this new housing amendment and the elderly housing. It would be developed as a new section under the special requirements for specific uses. So it will be reviewed and allowed as a special land use in the RM, which is the multiple family residential districts, the RMH, which would be the mobile home park districts, C, the local business district, C1, general business district, C2, highway business districts, and MU, the mixed use district. Now, we had suggested the light industrial district, but the Planning Commission was not too keen because the light industrial district is quite often a buffer between heavier industrial and that was not a place where you wanted to place the elderly housing in, so we did not recommend that at this time. These are the only districts where it would be allowed. Before I go through the details of actually what the requirements of such a housing development would be, adopting this ordinance would also require some minor changes to the other sections of the zoning ordinance. We have a couple of sections where nursing homes and hospitals are listed in the same line. Now, our new elderly housing amendment does take into account independent, dependent, and assisted living. So we would suggest you remove nursing home in the same line as hospital to prevent any conflict about which regulation would be applicable. And then under each of those individual districts, we would just add in special land use as elderly housing. This elderly housing has got a purpose and an intent to actually provide people a place to age within the community itself. But while reviewing this as a special land use, the Planning Commission will review the scope, the scale, the placement, and what the potential negative impacts might be and how they can be mitigated before you would make a recommendation for approval of such projects. There are certain minimum size requirement if it's an independent unit versus a dependent unit. The minimum required usable floor area per dwelling, and this is based upon what state law also requires for these units to be so that they're not too small either. One of the main things would be frontage on a major thoroughfare as described in our master plan and the Wayne County Plan too. So these are typically developments with many units. You don't want them coming off a secondary road and creating traffic issues. If they're off a major thoroughfare, necessary improvements can be made. Now, the maximum building height is typically consistent with what is allowed in the underlying zoning district, but Director Akers did ask me to double check with regard to building height and setbacks that what we are proposing is consistent with what is in the underlying districts. And if it's a reasonable keeping to what is required for the district, or is it less or is it more? One of the main things for a senior and elderly housing development would be a minimum of 20%, 25% of the site exclusive of any public rights of way must be maintained as landscaped open space. So it's not just going to be like a typical apartment complex with just houses and parking. You're going to have to provide open space, and there need to be active and passive recreational amenities. Some seniors might not be able to walk too far, but they need to be able to at least walk into a place where there is a planned park-like setting, benches, sit down, enjoy the outdoors without just coming out of their unit into a parking lot. So that would be an important component of these developments. We do have recommendations for building architecture. These are based on what other communities recommended, but I was discussing it just before the meeting with Commissioner Akers, and I thought maybe I would go back and look at the overlay district because some of these parcels are in the Belleville Lake overlay district, and we also have specific standards for architecture of buildings in the commercial districts. So if those architectural standards are good enough, I will just cross-reference them here saying that you need to maintain whatever architectural requirements are already there in the ordinance for the underlying zoning district, because I believe the Planning Commission spent a lot of time designing those. So if they work well, we will just cross-reference. If you build in this district, you must keep to what the architectural guidelines already are for the district. Accessory uses and buildings, structures shall be permitted, but those typically that are incidental to servicing the residents of the facility. Now, parking, landscaping, and signage, we already have requirements in our ordinance for based upon which district they're located and what they're allowed, so we have just cross-referenced those. So overall, since the proposed use is going to be a special land use, it will still have to meet all the subjective standards and ensure that it is in the interest of health, safety, and welfare, and all the other standards you look at. In addition to that, all these design requirements will be in place. So I believe collectively look together, the site plan and the special land use will ensure that we have developments that suit the needs of the community, but at the same time take into account what is near you, next to you, and provides adequate buffers for it. So I'm open to any comments, any feedback of changes you would like, and the next step would be to actually consider when you would like to set a public hearing to receive public feedback on this.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So questions or comments? We'll start with the commission. Commissioner Franzoy?
The overall plan is very good. My only comment or complaint is elderly housing versus senior housing.
Okay?
Because if this is open to people 55,
Yes.
I don't think they consider themselves elderly at that point.
Okay.
I mean, it's just a matter of semantics.
Point well taken. I think the existing ordinance had elderly, so I kept it, but that's a good point. I think it's not too difficult to change the existing ordinance reference from elderly to senior, so
Okay.
we'll use the term senior housing in that case.
Thank you.
Anything else right now? Okay. Commissioner Boynton, anything?
No, ma'am.
Commissioner Kelly?
The ordinance.
Commissioner Atchison?
Through the chair, the only thing is I'm glad we've got this under discussion. I'm glad we're going to create this, but I'd like to also know that after it goes through the public hearing, are we going to identify properties within the Van Buren Township that this would be kind of marketed to any developer that was looking to come to town, to Van Buren Township to develop? Are we going to identify the properties, the parcels of properties where this is feasible?
One of the things that we've been doing since we started talking about this is some of the local real estate brokers and local developers that I have regular communication with. I've put it out there to them that we're considering this, and these are the zoning districts that we're considering looking at. And while it still needs to go through the approval process, it's something to keep in the back of their head, because we do get contacts. And ironically enough, it seems the last couple weeks we've been getting a bit more communication for these types of facilities. So we do put it out there. We do communicate it. One of the things that we might want to do is our DDA does a lot more targeted marketing on some of the parcels that are in the DDA district, and this may be something that they can assist us with. I'll have to talk with Director Ireland, but that may be an option as well that we can take.
Can you tell me what is the DDA district again? Is it just through this area here, Belleville Road?
It's along the Belleville Road corridor, and it also extends a little bit wider, but for the most part, it's along the Belleville Road corridor, and it extends from Van Born all the way south to the city of Belleville limits. So it goes Van Born, Ecorse, Tyler,
A big
goes through 94. It covers a wide area. So a lot of the areas that we would be looking at that are allowable for construction, the majority of them are going to be in the DDA corridor. There's a couple other areas outside of there that are zoned commercial, but the vast majority of them are in that area.
Because I remember it was a few years ago now, I can't even recall how many years ago it was, but there was a senior living housing. Now the newest word I'm hearing, not saying elderly, is memory care facilities. But there was going to be a development next to Meyer or by Meyer. I heard about that. It was way before I was on the Planning Commission. But I'd like to end with, I hear a lot of people speak in Van Buren Township that we are a premier community. And I can't remember if I said this at the last meeting or not, but a premier community has housing for everybody, every stage of life, and I don't want to lose anybody in our community. Well, some people that are not great people. I guess I'd like to show them the door. But other than that, Premier Community has housing for every stage of life. Not just, new housing or middle-agers, but everybody. And I know that we've lost a lot of people in the community, and I want to retain them. So a Premier Community has to have housing for all ages.
Great, thanks so much. I had just a question for us to consider under the parking standards. It seems to me that the parking standards for independent living, as opposed to certainly assisted and maybe even dependent, might have some variance. So it's just to double check and make sure the ordinance gives us, especially in the special land use, the ability to work with the developer and make sure that we're meeting their needs, but also not over paving for parking that isn't necessary.
I believe this ordinance cross-references to the parking ordinance, and the parking ordinance does have flexibility where a developer can present to the planning commission based on a need. If the ordinance, worst-case scenario, requires 200 spaces and they realize based upon their residents and their capacity, they're going to need only 120, they would present you hard data, and the planning commission will have the ability to modify it without needing a variance for it.
Okay, sounds great, thank you. So questions or comments from the audience? I think we have an interested party here that we've heard from before.
Again, Beth Ernett with Clover Development, and we are a very interested party, and I really have no questions. I do have one question.
Okay.
Is how quickly can you move this forward? Comments, I think the ordinance is fair. It's something that my company would be willing to work within. I think the language isn't, I'm probably seeing about 70% of ordinances say elderly housing, but I think you propose a very valid point. But we're not, even if the ordinance calls it elderly housing, that's not how we'll bring it forward. So, I think that's not a huge, it wouldn't be a big deal for me. But we would like to get started. So as soon as you guys could move this forward, we would appreciate it.
Thanks so much. So to answer your question, we go to public hearing, there's a certain notice period for that, and then it passes from us as a recommendation to Township Board. So there's still some hoops that just procedurally we'll have to go through. Okay, thanks. All right.
Madam Chair? Sure. One minor thing. So we talked
Certainly,
about
Commissioner Kelly.
sorry,
Go ahead.
changing the title from elderly to senior. But if you take a look at the ordinance, it's referred to it that way through the entire ordinance. So I just wanted to.
Yes, it'll consistently be changed to senior everywhere.
Okay.
Even any existing references in our current zoning ordinance, I'll make sure we change it all to senior housing.
Great. All right, so what's before us tonight is to ask you to set a public hearing date, even though we haven't seen a final?
Well, that's up to the discretion of the planning commission. I know with Ms. Christian's report, some of the changes, modifications, things that we're going to look into were very specific rather than broad. And, generally, my personal opinion, I guess, is when you have specific feedback and you know what you're looking at and you're at the point where you're kind of towards a final document, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to schedule a public hearing. The planning commission can, even if they're after they hold the public hearing, if there are some items that want to tweak or change, it can always be moved and pushed back. But, however the planning commission would like to proceed, if the planning commission would like to schedule a public hearing, you certainly could do so. I think the guidance and the feedback was specific enough that we could have it taken care of. So it's really at the discretion of the planning commission if you feel comfortable enough moving forward at this time.
Anyone have concerns, or should we go ahead with the public hearing tweak and then keep it going?
Madam Chair, I think I'm ready to move forward with the public hearing.
Yeah, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Done that before. Good, all right. Do you need action from us? Official action or just a request to staff?
Why don't you make a motion? I think that would probably be, at this point, that'd be a good idea.
Is there a motion? to
Madam Chair,
request a
I
public hearing?
move that we continue with the, well, to have staff set up a public hearing in regards to the senior housing ordinance amendment for review, as well as to continue with the revisions that may be necessary with McKenna and Associates with our zoning ordinance,
Okay,
updating and revision.
is there support?
Support.
Commissioner Kelly. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great. All right, so we'll look forward to having that public hearing. When do you think? Last meeting in July? Maybe?
Yes, so at this point, we do not have enough lead time to do July 10th, so it'll probably be July 24th, yes.
Okay, that's what we'll shoot for then.
The notice has to be in the papers by July 9th. I think we can make that. 15 days.
Great. All right. Thanks so much. Last item under general discussion that we have a presentation for, item 2, is the lakefront lot analysis as requested by the BZA. And Ms. Stamper has left us and gone on to other duties in another community, and we appreciate everything she did for us. But Director Akers, do you want to highlight what it was that Ms. Stamper presented for us?
Yes, so let me kind of give a bit of a background of the request. So the BZA, probably over the last couple of years, has seen a handful of variance requests for lakefront homes. And these are on some of the lots. There's a couple areas in the township where we have narrower lots, like 50-foot wide lots or less. And, you had individuals who were coming in and building homes and looking for variances from the zoning ordinance for a variety of different things. Some of them were side yard setbacks. The most recent one, which kind of triggered this, was you had an individual who was asking for a variance from the minimum house width size. So our zoning code requires that you have a house has to be at least 24 foot wide on all sides. Well, wide lot, that leaves you that leaves you a building envelope where that 24 foot wide home just fits and doesn't leave any room for, if you wanted to have a deck on the side of the house or any of those items. So that's really what kind of triggered the BZA requesting that staff look into this and have a conversation with the Planning Commission about it. So under the memo that Grace put together, or Ms. Stamper put together, excuse me, they looked at 2 different potential options for the Planning Commission to maybe address this situation differently and do a leeway, have maybe a little bit more leeway. One of the options that were looked at was maybe having a separate zoning district for lakefront properties, which maybe had a more forgiving setback than what the current zoning allows. Currently, we allow, the requirements are 10 foot on one side and 25 foot on both sides. You'd have to do 10 on 15 or 11 and 14, 12 and 13 in order to meet the setback requirements. That was one of the options that they had looked at. The other option that had been looked at was Lake Orion was a specific community that was used where they have a sliding scale. So, if you have a 70-foot wide lot, it has different setbacks than if you have a lot that was 50 feet wide. So the idea is on the narrower lots, you'd have smaller setbacks in between the areas. And there was an example of Lake Orion that Ms. Stamper had looked at that they had recommended. The staff memo recommends that if the Planning Commission wants to address this issue, that rather than create a separate district, that the Planning Commission consider a sliding scale. There are a couple challenges with that proposal as well, and a couple challenges that I want to make sure that we're highlighting and addressing. There's a certain element of inequity that goes into it because if somebody has a 70-foot wide lot and you're making them have 10-foot setbacks, and somebody has a 50-foot wide lot and you're having 5-foot setbacks, the rationale behind it isn't, I don't believe is the strongest, because, what you're doing is you're creating a flexibility. And in a lot of instances too, with lakefront homes, you have people who have picked them up, demoed the smaller homes. They want to build larger homes, and a lot of times they create challenges in certain neighborhoods with housing types that aren't consistent, or with challenges with some of the neighbors. One of the items that Ms. Stamper looked at, that I think if the planning commission wants to address this item, that might be a viable issue, is if rather than have applications in this situation go before the BZA, which are limited to the standards that the case law has established and the really strict criteria of what it takes to get a variance, rather than having these items go before the BZA, maybe the better option would be to create a set of rules which would give the planning commission a little flexibility to grant waivers in particular situations. So I mean that's something that we may want to consider. But one of the last items that I wanted to highlight is one of the questions that we look at when we're doing a policy change is how vast, how big this issue actually is. And I know that we've only seen a handful of lakefront variances over the last 10 years or so, maybe 3 or 4, which I know there are other communities, I'm sure Ms. Christian working in Lake Orion can, give you some examples, but I know with my time in Genoa Township, I was doing 6 a month with new homes that were being built on the lake. So I don't know that the scope of the problem is quite, especially with the number of homes that we have all along Belleville Lake, I don't know if the scope of the problem is really that large here. But if it's an added flexibility that you want staff to explore further, we certainly can. But again, this is what the BZA had tasked us with looking into. This is kind of some alternatives and some ideas for the planning commission if we feel it's a big enough scope that's something we want to handle. But otherwise, the scope I feel is relatively limited. So, be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Questions or comments from the commission? Or, I'm sorry, let's have, what do you got?
I would add a little feedback because some of my clients are lakeside communities and I encounter this problem quite often. In one of the client communities where I work, they have 2 lakes and they have addressed it. They had a creative solution for it. We had the same thing. At what point do you tell somebody you can have 10 feet and, oh, now your lot is slightly smaller, you need just 5 feet. So what we did is we created an overlay district just around the lake. And if the lot is non-conforming with regard to minimum required lot width, your required side yard shall be 15% of the lot width. So it set it as a percentage of the width. So that sort of worked very well on a sliding scale rule. If you applied it to a sliding scale, it worked without somebody saying, hey, I have 70 foot, so you're penalizing me more versus somebody with a 50 foot. But when you make it as percentage, it's all relative. So that has worked pretty well because we have 2 lakes. It's Northfield Township. We have Whitmore Lake and we have Horseshoe Lake, and some of the lots are really tiny. They're really narrow, and we got into the same challenge. How do you fit a house in there with the side yard? So we said 15% of the lot width if your lot does not meet the minimum lot width requirement for the district. So that has actually worked out well and has not been challenged by homeowners as being unfair. So I think if at all we were to look, that might be a third possible solution. So we could, in the future, if you look into this, we could take examples of different non-conforming lot sizes and apply all 3 and show you how it would look. So that might be something.
And that would be if the planning commission, instead of the BZA, were looking at a request from an applicant. Okay. Good. Other questions or comments? Anyone have strong feelings one way or the other about a direction? Anyone feel that we should move to having the planning commission do these reviews as opposed to the BZA?
I think that would be a little easier process because, as Director Akers stated, their process is very, very narrow, if you will, because of state statutes and things of that nature. And we would have a greater flexibility to serve the community without as many, I don't want to say restrictions, but comply with that would make it difficult for a lot owner in that regard.
Okay. And you, if it comes to the planning commission, then something that gives us several ways to examine it and try and determine what's fair?
I think what Director Akers was saying is the Planning Commission would look at the problem as a whole and adopt an ordinance amendment or an overlay, which would give that flexibility so people don't have to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals and get a variance for it.
Right.
So. Yes, I mean, well, that's one of the options. I mean, one of the other options that was explored too is whether or not the plan, rather than having staff having that flexibility, maybe having, if there's a waiver or change, it go before the Planning Commission. But I do like the sliding scale, the percentage. That sounds like it would actually work relatively well. And any concerns that you would have with inequitability and neighborhood complaints, I think that would alleviate a lot of it. But I mean, again, it's something that we can continue to explore.
I think we'd have to see what the language is and where it gets placed in the ordinance as well. I'm not sure that we need an overlay district for the entire lake to deal with 4 or 5 lots that are not complying right now. Right. I think let's see if we can come up with the simplest way to make sure that everybody gets a fair review and that we can make a good decision. Anyone in the audience on this discussion, this agenda item? Anyone else? So you'll send something back to us.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Anything else under general discussion from the Planning Commission? From staff? From the audience? If there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Commissioner Boynton, support Commissioner Franzoy. All in favor say aye. Aye. And thank you, we're adjourned. Good discussion.